Thank you, Dave. Good evening, all. Welcome to the November 2021 workshop meeting of Media Borough Council. As always, we accept public comment via email. You may send your comments to comments@mediaborough.com and comments@mediaborough.com. We will read those comments, those questions, both at the beginning of the meeting as well as at the end of the meeting. Before we get underway, I think on behalf of all of council, it's appropriate to express appreciation for all of those who stood for election this past week. It is sometimes a lonely, sometimes a cold, sometimes challenging task to run for public office, and it's important that people do so. Also, a special note of thanks to all of those who helped make the elections run, whether it's judge of elections, election inspectors, poll watchers. All of them have an important role to play in our system of government, which depends upon free and fair elections. And I'm happy to report that the elections that we've had this past week, just like this past year, went efficiently and well. An observation, since we are a few days past October 31, just my own personal observation. Media is a wonderful place to live. It is a tremendous community, and it is really heartwarming to see how many people come to media to celebrate Halloween. There are many communities where they don't have many people coming out at all for tricks or treats. Yet in media, we have so many people who come out. I think it says a lot about our community that many people, even who do not live in media, they feel welcome to be here. They feel welcome to celebrate the holiday with us. So just an observation. All right, so we have, as always, public comment and privilege of the floor. Karen Rapino is just about ready to let us know whether or not we have any email comments.
No, nothing.
None. Okay. So none, at least for now. If there are any members of the public who are present and they wish to address council, now is the time. Please come to the microphone. There we go. We have a little bit more light. Please come to the microphone. Tell us who you are, where you live, what's on your mind. We don't seem to have any takers, so we'll move along then to the Borough Manager's report. Brittany Foreman.
Good evening. I just have a couple of items just for housekeeping. We are on version 2 of the agenda that's in your packet, so please use that. And when we have the budget discussion, please use that version as well. That's in your packet. It reflects the latest information that came out of the Finance Committee yesterday. I wanted to, as I mentioned last month, just remind everyone about Heritage Park's dedication this Saturday at 2 p.m. And I included a program in your packets, and there's some out on the table for the public. So we encourage everyone to show up. It's going to be a great time. Music, food. It's really some great speakers. So encourage everyone to show up. And finally, I just wanted to mention the 2022 holiday schedule has been set. Similar to last year, there's 13 unique holidays. The administration side has added the new federal holiday of Juneteenth, and it's being swapped out for Flag Day, which was not a federal holiday. And just so everyone knows, the Personnel Committee is aware, but the Public Works crew is going to retain Flag Day because that was literally written into their contract for another year. So we'll be sure to communicate clearly with our residents what any trash schedule changes. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Does any member of council have any questions for our manager at this time? Just one clarification, because for a number of years now we've been referring to what we will be calling Heritage Park. We refer to it as 5th and Broomall. So for those folks who are not yet quite with the new nomenclature, the dedication of Heritage Park will take place at 5th and Broomall Streets this Saturday beginning at 2 p.m. We'll move along then to the engineer's report. The engineer has arrived, so this train can leave the station. Mr. Ansett.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few updates on some capital projects. Next week, we should see the start of the road program. Again, there's only 4 streets that are being paved in this year's road program. The contractor estimates work will be completed by November 30th at the far end of it, so it looks like the weather next week should be more conducive to doing some paving. Looking forward to that project. I did stop by the Armory to make sure that the work that we had done to make sure that the building was relatively waterproof was successful. So I stopped in to make sure that the basement, our friends at the museum, Pennsylvania Veterans Museum, were satisfied with the work. I'm looking forward to phase 2 of that work, which is some additional work around the ramp area, some concrete, some additional repointing of the building. But overall, I think that the Armory is in much better shape than it was just a few months ago. Also reporting, we did receive some the submittal materials for the wayfinding project, and there are a number of different hoops that we have to jump through before we give them authorization to move forward, but there's activity on that project as well, so good news all around. But unless there are any other questions, I can pause my report right there. I did submit a written report with a full breakdown of all the projects and where they are.
Does any member of council have any questions for engineer? Seeing that there is none, we'll move along then to the solicitor's report. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing to report tonight.
Does any member of council have any questions for Mr. Scott at this time? Seeing that there are none, we'll move along to the mayor's report. And by the way, congratulations to Mayor McMahon. He has earned another 4-year term, as has the gentleman to his left, Councilman Kevin Boyer. Congratulations to both of you. Mr. Mayor, I think you have a few things to say this evening.
I got a lot to say.
Good, let's get to it.
Okay, first, you and I talked about this earlier, the transit. We started a program, we didn't start the program, we joined the program of the transit for media residents to go to doctor's appointments in the borough or if outside the borough and go to other places, maybe to shop, but it's mostly a medical thing. So the transit is now back. I think I mentioned this over a year ago, but they closed shop for about a year, so now they're reopening. So Peter and I discussed it today, and Brian and I discussed it today. The county, it's a county thing. The county picks up 85% of the cost to drive someone to a place of necessity, I guess you would say, and the borough would pay 15%. And we talked about a figure of $5,000. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be voted on or agreed with or what. But, I think, did I explain all, Peter?
You did, and as I told you, Mr. Mayor, this is about the last chance you have to insert it in the budget, so it's a good thing you talked to us today. So when we talk about the budget later, we'll all recognize that in the $9.7 million budget, there might be an extra $5K.
This is for 22, right? Okay.
You mean starting in 22?
Yes. Peter shook his head.
Yeah. Okay, next, we're going to have a parade next Thursday here, Veterans Day Parade. Theme is Welcome Home to the Afghanistan veterans who have had a tough time, especially publicity-wise. Our Grand Marshal is a fellow named Cedric Lighton. He's the military analyst for CNN, both international and national. He served in Afghanistan, he lived in Afghanistan. He has what I consider to be the best list of people that have not been able to get out, if they're still trying to get out. It's a disaster how it was held, how it happened so quickly and people couldn't get out of the place. So he will be here to I guess, talk a little bit about that. And also there are several Afghanistan veterans in the area that will also be honored on that day. Otherwise, it'll be pretty much the same as we have every other year. So again, it begins at 11:11 at 11:11 on State Street, the parade. Goes down to the courthouse. After the parade's over, we have a ceremony, and that's when Cedric will say what he has to say. Okay, what's next here? The theater. The theater's reopening. Mom and Mia comes not next week. They're there rehearsing now. The show opens on the 19th, runs for think it's 16 weeks or so. It goes into January. We relied on, I guess, word of mouth mostly to bring people to shows like that. But the executive director there went looking for grants recently, and I think some of you already know this. The grants he went for are promoting town media and promoting the theater, getting people to come to media and not only go to the show, but go to dine, shop, etc. He put in an email to all of us one day, just off the top. He said, just received a grant for $715,000 to promote media. That was it. And of course, everybody goes, what? You know, and he got several calls, and he was able to do that. Last week, he's not nearly as good as he was before. Last week, he came up with another $357,000 to promote the town. So you're going to be seeing a lot of media on the TV, not only promoting the theater, but promoting everything else about the theater. So, proud of how he did it and what he did, and hopefully it'll certainly help. Speaking of, I guess, economic development, I was there, and a couple other people, some Borough Council people were at the opening of the game store. That's an ideal business for our town. And again, it's getting people out doing two things, not just going to the game store, but also perhaps to the bakery, which is opening in December at some point, it's next door to it, or shopping at other stores. So, so that's business, new business that kind of works well together with everybody else. Let's see, is that all I have? A lot of silence here. Yeah, I think that's it. That's it.
There's an awful lot. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does anyone have any questions for the mayor at this time?
I'm sorry, I did not hear clearly. Who got the grant for media theater?
Patrick Ward.
Patrick did?
Yeah, he went, I mean, there's a lot of ways of getting grants, and he's worked at it for years. But because of the pandemic, this kind of a grant came up. You couldn't get this kind of grant before. But it's basically, as I said, you know, promote not only the theater, but the town and everything around it.
Yeah, that's what you, and again, how much is it for?
$715,000 and $357,000, so a little over $1 million.
Any other questions?
And it has to be spent within a year.
Well, I have a group that's going on it. I mean, they're...
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, we'll move along then to council committee reports. Paul Robinson, Properties, Public Works, and Fire. Paul?
Okay, regarding fire, Peter, Brian, and I have met with members of the fire department, working out details with regards to the possibility or probably will occur of paid firefighters in 2022. Have all the roll numbers, now we're putting those numbers together for everybody, so we should have something, you know, concrete relatively soon. Next on the agenda, I'm really going to defer to our engineer because I know he'll be able to discuss this much better than I would be able to. So, Kevin, you could give us a brief synopsis of Northall Street.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Robinson. This might take a little bit of time, and it's a lot of detail, so just hang in there. So this update revolves around the grant that we won for the Northall Street project. So back in 2016, the borough retained a company called T&M to develop a borough-wide stormwater management plan. There were about 11 or so key areas of town that we were concerned about that had to do with flooding, flood control, stormwater, and some other general concerns that were addressed. One of the first areas that we looked at was the area of Ridge Road and North Olive Street, which has traditionally hasn't had a lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure is aging. So this is an area where we wanted to inject a lot of energy. So the borough won a grant to have some facilities installed that will hopefully alleviate some of the concerns that are out there at North Olive Street and Ridge Road. Part of the design is to install a large underground storage facility at the small parkette area next to the Oakmont on Providence Road, which is a small borough on a piece of land. It's about It's about a third of an acre. In addition to that, what's proposed is to install some inlets and some additional pipe and route flow and collect flow in that neighborhood to hopefully transition it down to the existing underground facilities back to the creek. We did receive a grant from PennDOT, which means that there were a considerable amount of detailed planning, engineering, studies. It was a whole slew of things that we had to go through. We retained McCormick Taylor in 2018. And again, the cost of their services for their proposal was about $163,000 to design this and shepherd it through the entire PennDOT process. We have gotten to the point of, I believe, what is called either a preliminary approval from PennDOT, and there's now a need to go and finalize a plan set, some documentation, things like that. McCormick Taylor is requesting a supplement to their original proposal of $58,000 and some change. One of the concerns I have about this project, and additionally, I might also add that in their existing planning, there was some good coordination between McCormick Taylor and TPD at the time, who was concurrently developing a traffic calming plan. So there were really two major concerns that the residents in that neighborhood had. Naturally, one was the flooding, the other one was traffic and speeding and volume of traffic that was coming through. So there were some elements. It wasn't the final traffic planning design layout that was installed, but there were some elements that were kind of thrown into the mix from McCormick Taylor, which is one of the reasons why they're asking for some additional money. PennDOT, at some midpoint in this process, put us on notice that they would only be funding $400,000 of this project. At the moment, the construction estimate has escalated from what was about $1 million to about $1.9 million, and what I think would realistically be about $2.1 million soup to nuts at this point. So we're sort of at this decision point about whether or not we want to continue going forward with this design, whether or not we want to continue going forward with this grant, or decide whether or not we want to really sit down and look at, if we're going to achieve these project goals, what kind of reduction of flooding are we going to have, what sort of impact are we doing here, are we getting the most bang for our buck, or are we a little bit dislodged from the original design project goals. We had a meeting, I think it was the properties meeting, I think it was the properties meeting. We brought the consultants in and they reported back. One of the concerns that I had, which is why we invited them in, is to say that they were only going to be showing a 20% reduction of flooding in the neighborhood, even during the full breakout of all of this work. So I was concerned about that, and I thought to myself, I don't know if moving forward and spending a considerable amount of money to only see a 20% of reduction of flow is really the most effective dosing of the resources that we have here. So I thought to myself, I'd like to really pause, give the council an update of where this project is, and come up with a couple of ideas that I think might be worthwhile. One, I don't know if we want to continue to move forward with this particular design without at least stopping to pause to add a few elements. The first of which is this entire network that we're being shown. It installs an underground seepage bed along Providence Road, a whole set of storm sewers down to Northridge, but it stops. And it stops kind of short of reaching the real goal, which is to get all of the flow into pipes under the underground vault system back to the creeks. There is an existing 18-inch pipe, an existing 24-inch pipe, and I think realistically, if we want to see a reduction in flow, and it could very well be the nature of the fact that some of these storms that we've seen have just been freakish, but we need to move water. We really need to move a lot more. So I think there's one pipe that I would like to see upgraded from what's an existing 24 to either a 30 or 36-inch pipe. Again, I'm coordinating with their team to sort of talk about some of this stuff. The other one is, I would really like to formalize negotiations or discussions with Upper Providence. Considerable amount of this flow comes from that Upper Providence area, and you can see it. So if you're standing in the streets, you can see this water sheeting off from areas that were probably put in the ground in the 50s and 60s. There were no stormwater facilities. There's nothing. We're dealing with what is really completely uncontrolled, unmitigated, unattenuated flow from our neighboring municipality, it's just not fair that we're taking the lion's share of this effort. There is another concern that I have, that even though PennDOT is putting in $400,000 worth of cash into this project, their strings that are attached with this inflate project costs by the very nature of the project. There's a lot more oversight, there's a lot more requirements that we have to do. There's just seems to me that we've kind of, it's not a really effective use of tax dollars to be jumping through hoops to satisfy PennDOT requirements that artificially inflate the project, where we could spend more money on things like what we call in construction bricks and sticks, inlets, pipes, really moving water throughout the system, instead of kind of getting lost in satisfying, for want of a better term, PennDOT's bureaucracy. It just seems like when I looked at the estimate, the recent estimate, there were items in there that we would not have these things if this thing was under local control. We simply would not have them. There were a considerable amount of bid items that were required to put in to satisfy PennDOT's overseers. And when I look at it, I think to myself, I think it might be time to just at least pause, bring the council up to a level of awareness about where this project is, and maybe really rethink about whether or not we want to continue with this, if we want to go uphill with this project, if we want to bring it to the point where we are satisfying all of PennDOT's requirements, tantamount to $220,000 worth of engineering fees for what's could be $1 million or $2 million project. In addition, on top of that, we are doing a quick project, which again, the council is aware of, this emergency breakout. I'm still coordinating with Mr. Varjul some final elements, but that network will be connectable to the larger network. So we're getting a good head start on this thing. But one of the reasons I wanted to provide this update tonight was really to raise awareness about where this project is and sort of some of my concerns about if we're going to move forward, what direction do we want to continue doing? Do we want to knock on the door of Upper Providence? Do we want to pause with McCormick Taylor? Do we want to continue going down this route at PennDOT? Or do we want to consider any other options to make sure that what we're doing is an efficient use of tax dollars, it meets the project goals, we're reducing flooding, and we haven't gotten too far removed from the original intentions of what was T&M Stormwater Master Plan.
I think Kevin said that very well. I mean, most of us were here then, and I think the impression that at least I had, because I was very excited that this was going to be a project that was going to be both gray and green, but that the project would be resolved, or the issues would be resolved. And 20% does not, if I have 6 foot of water in my basement instead of 8 foot of water in my basement, I still got a lot of water in my basement. So I would encourage us, as Kevin said, let Kevin take a look at it, borough related, without worrying about the PennDOT, without worrying about McCormick Taylor. And at the same time, I guess it would be the smarter thing to do probably to at least wait until January everyone has their rework meetings, and then try to meet with Upper Providence. Anybody who knows anything about stormwater needs to recognize that it does not stop or start at your municipal boundary lines. So it's something that we need to work with our neighbors on in order to resolve the issue, or at least slow down some of the stormwater issues. That would be my suggestion to council, that we let Kevin have some time, put some numbers together without the need of PennDOT, McCormick Taylor, and even possibly, not using the PennDOT grant. And questions?
Yeah, that's my question to both of you. By doing this, are we essentially jettisoning the potential of this PennDOT grant, or can you work with them to modify the project within limits? And how much money are we talking about from them?
$400,000. Yeah.
Which is what percentage of, it's a potentially a $2 million project now?
The last update we got was 2.1 million.
And they wouldn't up their grant with a raised design?
No, so we did go to the grantors, who is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, the project is being sponsored by PennDOT. And we said to them, listen, we are concerned that this project might need some more cash. From our original expectations about where we were, the borough wasn't expecting to spend $1.52 million and then have a small portion of that be PennDOT.
What did they say?
It was originally a 70-30 match. they didn't tip their hand. So they didn't give us a commitment, they didn't give us good faith, they didn't say, Kevin, if you guys bring this thing to the point where it's approvable, we have a lot more resource and we're gonna put it in. They weren't willing to make that commitment. So when we originally applied for this, it was, it looked very nice. It was originally a 70-30 match, which is good. 30 cents on the dollar is great for a project like this. But, 20 cents on the, 80 that we're paying, suddenly this project looks like, all right, if we're gonna do that, let's pause and make sure that we're actually gonna hit our goals. So I don't wanna be beholden to PennDOT or any other organization who is able to give us terms and conditions that dictate that we're not going to really be hitting our project goals because, we have hamstrung ourselves, for want of a better term. So,
Well, given that, I'd be comfortable with you hitting pause on this and spending some time seeing what the alternative you could come up with and pricing it, and seeing if it makes economic sense to proceed.
again, the commitment from the borough there is still to work as efficiently and as quickly as possible with either PennDOT, the neighborhood community, and our own resources to address this issue. This was one of, if not the number one concern that we had in that plan. And the very nature of grant projects, the very nature of PennDOT regulations, things can kind of get a little bit away from you. And I want to pause to make sure that we're not losing sight of what is our goal here, and that is to protect the downstream property owners, to reduce flooding, to make sure the streets are safe and passable, and that the infrastructure is in good shape. And if we've lost sight of that just a little bit, that's why I wanted to present this tonight.
And the council, I had an opportunity this week to speak to several residents, and I really have to applaud them because they're not going crazy. They didn't throw me against the wall and threaten to beat me up. They understand the process. Their biggest thing is, and I want to say is, they want to see the situation resolved correctly. We did touch base on what was discussed tonight might solve 20%, and that's when they start to give the look of, we've been waiting 6 years for 20%. So I think it's great, and we are very fortunate to have an engineer committed like Kevin is, that I think he's going to be able to crunch numbers and come up, which we all are here for, is how are we going to spend the taxpayer dollars the best. And sometimes, maybe it sounds crazy, but sometimes maybe a grant isn't necessarily the very, very best way to resolve the issue. So appreciate if anybody else has questions. If not, then I'll move on. I don't want to take up too much time on the agenda.
I just wanted to ask Kevin. Kevin, if we don't do this project with PennDOT, what do we lose?
What do we lose?
Yeah, like what do they bring to the party?
PennDOT, ideally, that's a great question. PennDOT originally was going to bring 70% of the funding for this project. Through the original gift of this project was that they were going to fund the lion's share of it, 70%. Right now, where these numbers are, they're not doing that. What do we lose? These particular projects are funded through something called the multimodal, it's actually the TA set aside, but it's the multimodal fund of Pennsylvania. That money comes from, it really comes from what I understand, in 2013, Act 89 was adopted, and it's money and funding through Marcellus Shale activities up in the state. What we might lose is some of our good favor with VBRPC or PennDOT, but the reality is the terms have changed. It's not, in some municipalities, Lisa, what happens is, the grantor brings 70%, and then the local municipality, they're not in good financial shape, they can't even hit the match, or then they have to turn down the grant, or they go out to bid, and what happens is the reality of the construction numbers were too high. In this particular case, this grant, it doesn't even look or resemble what our original expectations were when we applied for it. It was supposed to be a 70-30 thing at about $1 million, and now it's, whatever that number is, it would be 20% or 80% at $2 million. So again, if someone said, if I went to them, or if collectively we went to them and said we wanted to back out of this, I don't think they would be overly upset. I think they would understand, and I think they do understand it. So,
And half of our funding, half of the grant would actually go to consultants.
that's right, yeah.
So before we even put a shovel in the ground,
There is, again, not to put this on a completely bad spin, there's a lot of good news about this project. And when I say that is, we have a complete survey of that area. We have a lot of hydraulic analysis of that area. We know the system well. We have had we've had field testing done, so we know where things are. We're not guessing about what the mechanical recommendations are. We've been discovering things that we just didn't know. Lisa, some of this stuff was buried in the ground in the 1950s and 60s, and it's even predates Sandy Walton. Like, this stuff is old, and some of it is really falling apart, and it needs a lot of care. So a lot of that research is valuable. So it's not a complete loss. It's not saying that we have we're completely abandoning all that research. We're not. Again, a lot of the money that's already been sunk goes into the discovery about the nature of the soils, the nature of the pipes, the discovery of utilities and things that are out there. So my primary concern is, are we still on track to reach these goals? And if we do a project, if we went out, if we waved a magic wand and we spent $2 million and we didn't reach the project goals, we'd say, what did we just do? Like this, so it's kind of like I said tonight, it's just a little bit of a pause to make sure we're literally and figuratively on the same page of what we're doing.
Okay, next on my agenda is the change order for the decorative lights. Number one, if anybody has not had the opportunity, if you could go down to the end of State Street on the south side, there is a new light that reflects the LED instead of the current light bulbs that we have in our decorative lights. Everyone has looked at it so far still feels that they're too bright and too cold, so we're still working with the manufacturer. However, when they started to look at the lights, they found that our photo cells are deteriorating. And at first I was like, I can't believe it, another change order. But those decorative lights are probably heading on 20 years. So I'm surprised they haven't gone earlier. I have noticed here and there that some lights will go on, some lights go on later, some lights go on earlier. So we've already approved the cost of the change of the lights if we can find the correct light. We're just looking to add $44.53.
So what do you consider the end of State Street?
Where the trolley tracks end, on the south side. You'll walk, if you go down there in the evening, you will notice it. So for right now, I mean, literally, I was a block away. I was like, yeah, I can see that one. So I was like, we have to keep looking, unless we want to, if we agree that we can't find anything else, and we agree with that color, then we can move forward. But we're still trying to find it. So that's that. 4 and 5 are looking for extensions with the county with regards to CDBG funds, looking at the Orange Street as well as down to the end of West State Street. So we're communicating with the county to see if we can have an extension with regards to that CDBG grant. Last is just really, so you are aware, we're working with a resident down on Brook Street who is a handicapped resident at this point and has almost no access to her property right now, to where she lives. And she's asking that we provide through where our property is, where our public works garage is, an opening. So basically we'd be dedicating a single parking space so that she could get to the back of her house. It would be just for her. It would be just for the duration of when she was living there. And talking to Bob Scott, it means it'd be very similar to the other type of agreements that we enter into. So if you want to add it into the legal side of it, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I have suggested in response to this request is a license agreement, which is less than a lease, less than an easement. It is something you can revoke at any time if you needed to repave that area, if you needed to reconfigure it. It would be, as Mr. Robinson said, it would be specific to this resident. It would not carry with the property or any other resident.
Really just
to still address, a need, an immediate need for somebody who's in a difficult position.
started out with 2 spots, worked it down to 1 spot. Really, I just kind of look at this as being a good neighbor.
So if you're on board with this, I would draft a license agreement. So I don't know if you want to make that into.
We have a thumbs up, and you can do it. You can bring it back in November. So if people, don't agree or disagree, let me know.
I assume Mike Green and the Public Works crew are okay with the, I guess, potential obstruction.
Yeah, this has been going on for a couple of
He's been
months
very
now, so
involved.
yeah.
with
that's-
the options.
We've actually changed the location. It was originally going to be in the parking lot of the Public Works, and now it's going to be, lack of better words, the alley or driveway into the Public Works. So it's worked out well. Actually, one of the other neighbors is letting them come through as part of their property, just so she would have access. So it really is one of those things that's kind of cool. You know, the neighbors all come together, and we just happen to be one of the neighbors in this situation, so. That's it.
All right, thank you, Paul. Anybody on council have any questions for Paul at this time? Seeing that there are none, we'll move along to Lisa Johnson, MBA Historic, Public Safety, Civil Service.
Thank you. The first mass gathering permit application that is on the list is for the Veterans Parade, Veterans Day Parade that Bob mentioned earlier on November 11th. The setup time would be 9:31 a.m. The event start time would be 11:11. Event stop time would be 1:15 p.m. and breakdown would be done by 1:30. This starts at State Street from Radnor to Orange, goes Orange to Front, and then Front to Olive. And they're going to stage it at the Delco Courthouse. This is something we've done for many years, so I don't see anything that's out of the ordinary. So in 2 weeks, I'll ask for approval of this, unless you have questions.
I don't think we should do it.
You don't. You need to speak to the guy down the way here. Okay. The next mass gathering permit application is for the farmer's market. This is going from December till April, and this is first and third Sundays of each month. They'll set up at 8 a.m. The event starts at 10, it stops at 12, and breakdown is finished at 1.
There's still events on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the winter, it's basically the winter market. It's just twice a month.
Right. First and third Sundays. Any questions on that one? Okay. The third mass gathering permit is for the New Year's Eve ball drop, which is on December 31st, of course. Beginning at 10 p.m. and starting at 11, setting up at 10 p.m. Starting at 11, the event stops at 1 a.m. and breakdown is finished at 1 a.m. And this is the same place as before. Spade Street between Church and Olive, Jackson Street between Jasper and Baker. And nothing different than in the past. So, any questions on this one?
Prior years, we've had no parking, so I'm assuming
Yes.
they had parking for a while, and then they said then you had to be off by, I forget what, and I remember that was very troublesome, shall I say. People were in the middle of dining, and they were told they had to move their car and things of that nature. So I don't know if it would be just smarter not to have people park on State Street, where in that section, all of New Year's Eve.
Yeah, they won't be happy with that.
No,
The restaurants wouldn't be happy.
it's just as disturbing to be at a restaurant eating and have somebody come in and then you have to move your car in the middle of your meal, but you guys figure it out.
I can ask Marty if there's anything different we should do. I'm gonna bring that up with the public safety committee.
And what band are they having?
I don't know. Doesn't say here. The last item on my agenda is just an announcement from the MBA. They're working on becoming, becoming independent, that's the word, I couldn't come up with the word. Independent and not leaning on the borough so much, so they're trying to be creative on various events that they would like to do. And one event that they're thinking about is a holiday pop-up event during, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's all in the state of flux right now, but there's an organization called Stateside Vodka, Philadelphia-based craft distillery. And they do this in Chestnut Hill, and very successfully. And what they would do is take over a empty storefront for a day, and it would just be a pop-up day event. And they would sell single cocktails, bottle sales, and do bottle and drinkware engraving as gifts. And, I think there's a lot of education that goes along with it. The patrons would come in and they're taught, how to go about distilling vodka. Not to the point where they could do it themselves, but Stateside Vodka has expressed their interest to come to downtown Media, because Media is the kind of place they do well in, and they have all the licenses, and they're ramp certified, they're fully insured, and they've done this successfully for several years, like I said, in Chestnut Hill and other places. So certainly everyone would be invited, but don't have many details after that, so I'll keep you posted on the progress. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Lisa. Does any member of council have any questions for Lisa at this time?
I'm assuming that if they're all set with this type of stuff, that we wouldn't really even need to be that involved, would we? And if it's the NBA function, and this group that's coming in is completely licensed and things of that nature, would we have even the ability to say, no, you can't come to an open storefront for a day?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I'm cool with it.
All right. Seeing if there are no other questions, move along then to Amy Johnson, Fair Trade Farmers Market, Shade Tree, and the Environmental Advisory Council.
Thank you. No real announcements. I just wanted to connect back with council on last meeting. You had all asked me to begin discussions with the NBA about the plastic bag ban, and that has been happening with Dave Fairman, and this will be back on the table in 2022. We really want to give ample time for discussions to happen with businesses after the holidays, but I just wanted council to know that I did connect with Dave Fairman on a couple of different occasions, and we'll see it back, discussions about it in 2022. Other than that, that's all I have to report for this meeting.
Well, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Amy?
I did. Amy, in the discussion about the plastic bags, have they considered the, I guess there's circulars that we get once a week that come in a plastic bag that are simply thrown in front of the house? Would it ban those? Because they come in a sealed plastic bag and you don't have any choice. It's just there. And nobody in my street uses them. They just get thrown right away. And does that count as a plastic bag?
I think that might be beyond, I don't even know what business that's coming from.
It's absolute litter, but.
It is litter, that's what it comes down to.
They know the system, and they present it as it's got First Amendment protection rights.
It's what?
First Amendment free speech protection rights.
Yeah.
Put those
I've gone down that
things
road like 6
and
times.
throw it up.
But
I
I
know.
thought this would be an angle if we ban plastic bags and they come in a plastic bag. Well, we can't have
And
plastic
then they could
bags.
throw it without the plastic bag.
Well, like it's easier to recycle, and they can put it right into
Is that a media
recyclable.
business? We're talking about the media businesses right now. I think baby steps.
I mean, we're talking retail, it's not a retail.
Yeah.
I mean, could you, worth thinking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine if you deliver without the plastic, then it can go right in the recycle.
Yeah, exactly,
Pull the bag
it'll
off.
save you a step.
Exactly. Yeah, because I feel that most people just throw them right in the recycle, they have the bag on it, and that's not good, so. I always take the bag off, and it's just an extra step, and I'd rather not have to do that.
It's a real shame because there's some great values.
As I throw them in the recycle, I see that, but I'd rather not have to do that to begin with, so I thought
Yeah, I
maybe
agree.
if we could roll that into the plastic bag, but maybe it's a little bit more elaborate than that.
All right, any other questions for Amy? I've got a few things on my report. First is just as an announcement. I think that we've announced this before. There is an opening on our planning commission. If you are interested, please send a letter of interest to our manager, and she will make sure that it gets where it needs to go. It's a great group to work with, and if you're interested, let us know. Item number 2, this is something that has been bubbling along for quite some time, a few years at least. It is our open space, parks, recreation, and bicycle routes plan. And it was just this past month that the draft plan was presented to council. We've had a couple of weeks now, 2-3 weeks now, to review it. And I don't know if anybody has any comments about it. I have a few comments, almost all laudatory. I think that it is a remarkable feature of this draft plan, which we hope to make a plan without the draft to modify it. That it discusses open space, parks, and recreation in a holistic way. It's not just about protecting open space, but also continuing to advance our bicycle network, upgrading the parks and recreation facilities that we already have, and keeping our parks safe, clean, functional, and aesthetically pleasing, and supporting and advancing partnerships. So there's a number of strategies that are embedded in this draft plan as to how it is that we can reach these goals. Well, we've had the opportunity to read this. Peter, I don't know if you wish to add a few comments. I mean, I think it's only fair to say that, but for your efforts, this might not be in front of us. You're going to shake your head no, but I seem to recall that in light of our experience with the park at 5th and Broomall, somebody who looked an awful lot like you said, there should be a better way. We should have a plan that helps us understand what our needs are and how to meet those needs. And I think it was you who said, we should have an open space plan.
Yay, me.
But you've been, Kevin, and Amy have helped guide this project through council. And of course, we must acknowledge the great support that we've received from members of the community. I think that when we first began talking about this and talking about the Heritage Park, there was a fair amount of wariness from residents, but as they became part of the project, I think they became very valuable contributors to this. So it worked out a wonderful example of how elected officials can work with residents to achieve goals that otherwise might be difficult to achieve. But having said all that, Peter, any words that you'd like to add?
Not many, really, Brian. I think you've done a good job of summarizing it. Just two things. I think the plan has an unusually good implementation schedule to it. It makes it much easier for folks to remember what to do from year to year, so that's real good. And the other thing that's in the plan, which you didn't touch on, so I'll mention it, is the landscape architect associated with the project gave us some really interesting ideas on what to do with some of our existing parks to enliven them, change their theme, etc. It's really quite dramatic, and I remember the steering committee meetings when she would present imagery of these ideas. Everyone would get particularly excited.
And not just those areas that we consider as traditional parks, but also the borough grounds.
That's right.
Which I think is a very attractive possibility that the borough grounds, which are lovely as they are, they offer opportunities to make them more accessible, more user-friendly than they currently are. I don't know if anybody has any comments, any questions, any suggestions, criticisms. I'm reading a wall of silence. Let me see.
I really haven't had a chance to dive into it as deep as you have, and it is a large document.
It is. It's 160 some odd pages when you include all the addenda and tables and all that sort of stuff. Peter mentioned the action plan, which is the kind of the schedule, prioritizing goals and kind of scheduling them so that we have kind of a roadmap as to how to implement. I should mention that, as with any of these plans, we're not bound by these plans. Like with our comprehensive plan, we do our best to work within the plan, but sometimes things happen. For example, there could be budgetary issues, what have you, that kind of throw us off a schedule, but we do our best. There's one thing that I wanted to talk to my fellow council members about, and it happens to be the first recommendation on the action plan, and it gives me some cause for concern. And this is about the acquiring of open space. The time period that it gives is 3 years, 2021 to 2024, which to me seems aggressive to the point of being unrealistic. And by way of example, we have a capital fund here that over the course of 10 years grew from zero to roughly about $6 million. So we were able to put away $6 million over 10 years. And what concerns me is that this recommendation would have us put away almost double that amount, $3 to $10 million. So taking the far end, $10 million. So almost double that amount in a third of the time, 3 years as opposed to 10 years. And I think in the interest of managing expectations, I wonder whether it makes sense to lengthen the period of time, think about the amount of money that is being recommended here. Brittany, just from a technical standpoint, if we were to suggest, or if we were to suggest such a change to the consultant, how would that come about? Would that be problematic?
Not problematic at all. She's interested in that type of feedback, and she'll make those changes accordingly.
So what do folks think? I mean, I'd hate to be sitting in a couple of years and we're trying our best, but we're not at $10 million.
I'll comment.
Sure.
Because I know that the steering committee spent a lot of time on this recommendation. And I think the time period I don't disagree with you that without the power of eminent domain and a significant municipal borrowing, we could not achieve what recommended there in that time frame. Other parts of the plan, when they're discussing the acquisition program, talk about the importance of working with willing landowners and developing a program to discuss that, develop a pipeline. So I think the actual recommendation could be easily changed to modify the schedule to have it based on having willing landowners to actually operate this and having the capital resources to do it. I think that would be appropriate and still reflect the intent of the plan.
So are you suggesting that we keep the same time period, 2021 through 2024, but essentially put a parenthetical in there, that indicates there's an assumption here?
Yeah, because there was I don't think I said this. There's also a reflection that, once an open parcel gets developed newly, it's not going to be available again for a generation at least. So, and because there's limited amounts of open space in the borough, the plan authors wanted to make sure that the borough officials were aware of the closing window that represents. And I think that's, expand, telescope out the time frame to, what did you say, 2 to 3?
It's 2021 to 2024, so 3 years.
You know, I think 3 to 5 might be more reasonable. Even that is fairly assertive, given the slowly moving decision-making nature of most private property owners. They take their time making their decisions.
So you're comfortable with making the change from 2021, 2024 to 2021, 2026, which would be the 5-year period, and then having a parenthetical?
I would love to hear from my fellow
I would
council
too.
people who are on the committee. I don't want to speak for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's better to spread it out, because as you said, raising that amount of money in that amount of time, especially now, it's not especially realistic, so I'm okay with it extending 2 years. I think that gives us time to look at what's valuable and what's available and take our time, so I would appreciate that.
I'm fine with that. Sorry. I would just recommend keeping the time frame as it is. Like you said, I mean, of course, this is a roadmap for us, and like you said, these are recommendations, we're not bound with them, so I just feel like we can work towards those goals, but I don't feel like that has to be changed just to then make like a significant difference if we change that time frame.
I agree with you, that's exactly what I was thinking, that this is a recommendation, we don't have to live by it, but this is what the group decided was a good idea. So I'm not sure there's a good reason to change it.
And Brian, if I could ask it again, I apologize because I have not had the opportunity to dive into it. Is there the magic number there? I mean, are we striving to meet X% of open space? I mean, should a community strive to do X? You know, because where I'm still kind of foggy is what defines a good amount of open space and what doesn't define a good amount of open space. And that's, you know, so if a property is, you know, if we buy everything up tomorrow, do we meet the requirements of open space? Or the next 2 years down the road, do we buy another, you know, 3 acres or 2 acres? And, you know, that's the question which I've been trying to figure out or trying to even find, and I haven't been able to find it yet. Is there a magic number that says, hey, if you're a municipality and you have X% of open space, you're doing a good job?
I would encourage you to read the report, Paul.
Okay.
Because I think those standard numbers are in there.
Okay.
There's really 3 criteria the report uses to answer your question. One is, can you walk to it within a certain amount of minutes?
10 minutes.
That's 10 minutes. On that, media does very well, because our parks are scattered, especially with the Heritage Park addition. The other one is, how much money are you spending per capita on parks and recreation? And that media does not do particularly well. So that's an area for improvement. So that's programming, maintenance, all those operational things for parks every year. And the last thing is just the raw amount of acreage that you have per your number of residents. So all of them combined make up what's good or bad.
Thanks.
Anybody else wish to weigh in on this? Well, that's fine. I think that when we make the motion in a couple of weeks' time, we just make it clear that there are some assumptions that are baked into this, and that this is a guideline. It's in some ways it's aspirational, and we'll work towards those goals with that in mind. Okay, I've got 2 other items. One is a land development issue, and there's Kevin, he's over there, I might need him. So I'm going to skip to number 4 first while he makes his way back. Number 4 is a resignation of William Payne from our zoning hearing board. Bill has served long and well. He is a font of knowledge, but it is his desire to step down. And I'll make a motion in 2 weeks' time to accept his resignation with regret. Those folks who are putting 2 and 2 together, yes, indeed, that means that there will be an opening on our zoning hearing board. So if you're interested, you may submit a letter of interest. Okay, so now that we have Mr. Mattson back in his chair, and I can lean on him if needed, there is a land development matter that is at 511 North Providence Street. For those who are not familiar with the address, this is directly adjacent to Holly House. It's the next property up from Holly House as you're going north on Providence Road. It is a business. It is called Media Dental. It has been there for quite some time. It's R1, and so you might wonder, how is it that you have a dentist office in R1? The answer is, it was there before R1 was extended to that area at the time it was built. It was permitted under our zoning code, but our zoning code was changed, so it now is a pre-existing non-conforming use that is permitted to continue. This is a project that is familiar to us because within this past year, the property was subject of a zoning application. I think they needed a special exception as well as a variance. And we did not oppose that. The special exception and the variance were granted by the zoning hearing board. And so now they're back with their plans for their to-build plans. And what they're looking to do is add on some additional space so that they can increase their operatories from, puts a shudder through your spine. It ought to. These are dentists at work. From 11 to 22. And that seems like a big bump, except when you consider how modern operatories work, it's done by staging. And that's, it wasn't always that way. It used to be that one room fits all. And now they'll hit you with the anesthesia in one, then take you to another. So this permits a certain flow. Setting all that aside, this is a fully compliant plan. They are requesting 2 waivers. The first waiver is that of the preliminary final waiver. The second is the survey requirement. I forget, Kevin, they're required to survey, what, 100 feet?
That's right.
100 feet, and they want to reduce it to, I forget.
They want to reduce it to show the significant figures less than 100 feet. So that they showed a full amount of survey information, things in the right of way, things that really need to.
Slow down, say it again.
I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm very sorry. They requested to show less than what's required, which is all the survey data out in a ribbon 100 feet around the entire tract. And they only want to show about 20 feet of things that are outside the property line. We don't really need the things that are outside the property line, except for, I had a few questions about the driveway access on Providence Road, since they're going to be making a change to it. So I wanted to make sure that we had all the information that we needed. So I think that was the only area, and they did show a fair amount of information there, so.
Yes. So, and otherwise, they are willing to comply completely with your letter. I believe that in your letter, you indicate that you do not object to either of the 2 requested waivers. The planning commission, although there was not a quorum last night, they met on Wednesday instead of Tuesday because Tuesday was election eve. They did not have a quorum, but the 3 members present indicated that they had no problem with this, especially since they've come before them before, and especially since the property will actually increase the amount of permeable surface. Even though they're adding essentially a wing onto the property, they're going to use pervious pavers and I think some underground discharge that will actually reduce the amount of stormwater runoff coming from the property. So they had no problem with that. They think that it's a fine project. I agree. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about this item?
Just one thing to add.
Sure.
For all intents and purposes, this is really 2 additions to the building. That's all it really is. So this application realistically could have come under a grading permit application, but the way that the MPC and our codes are set up is that it gets routed through this process, which is a lot more detailed and a lot more thorough of a review. But for all intents and purposes, there are just 2 wings of the building, if you want to call it that. They're being expanded. There are some changes to the circulation of the driveway area, and then we do have the good measure of reducing impervious and improving stormwater in that area of town. So, again, I think the overall net impact as far as stormwater would be positive. Again, I did ask to make sure that in the event that there's additional lighting that's installed at the site, that it be addressed to be compliant with our lighting code. When, if there's additional shrubbery or greenery that's installed, to minimize the impact on the residents of the Holly House. But on the whole, this application, again, it could have come in under the building permit application process, but it was routed through planning.
I did not mention the interior circulation aspect of this. At present, the driveway onto Providence Road, it goes two ways. So you can either exit in or exit out. I'll make it one way, so it's only entrance, not exit, which I think all of the planners agreed was a safer, preferable arrangement than was there at present. So all of the egress will be on Winter Street, Collector Street, so that traffic is immediately exiting traffic is immediately hit with Providence Road. They exit onto Winter Street, where there's a more controlled way to enter onto Providence Road. So, all in all, I think that it is a project that offers a lot of advantages, and the planners agrees. Unless there are any questions, we'll move along to Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few announcements from REC. The REC members did the Halloween judging, I guess that was last weekend, the 28th and 29th. Unfortunately, I didn't call, I was away this week. I didn't actually get the names, but first place was 222 East 4th Street. Second place, 29 West 7th Street. And third place, 217 East 2nd Street. And I promise you I will have names by the legislative meeting, but again, Paula was away, so I didn't get a chance.
One are John and Jean Thomas.
The last one?
Yeah.
Okay, well, congratulations for third place, and I'll find out who first and second are by 2 weeks.
What was first again?
It was at 222 East 4th Street.
7th and Jackson.
That's 22 East.
Fourth?
222 East 4th Street. I mean, that was what I got from the text, so I still have it. But anyway, they were judged, and they were awarded gift cards, and thank you for the REC members for your diligence and then running around and doing the voting, or doing the judging last weekend. I have 2 more announcements, one of which is the Winter Wonderland, which will be on December 4th. That's a Saturday. I believe it's 11 to 1. I will confirm that in 2 weeks, but generally that's the time frame. And this is where Santa will arrive and hand out gifts, and there'll be usually cocoa and cookies. And this will be our first actual in-person event since the pandemic, so I'm looking forward. And hopefully the pandemic won't crash and cancel it, but as of now it's on, and hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed we'll be able to do that on the Saturday the 4th.
So it's like, who hot toddies?
Why don't you bring your own toddy? You can supply the hot, but we do not have toddy.
We'll supply the hot, you supply the hot.
Exactly, yeah. So, maybe we run cookies or something like that, but and then the only other announcement is there are currently 2 openings on REC, so if you are interested in joining REC, we meet once a month, and then we do events throughout the year. Please send your interest to Paula, and we will be happy to take your information. Yeah, we have 1 new member, but we still have 2 openings, so we can use some interested people that would be willing to volunteer and help out with our events throughout the year. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Kevin. Any member of council have any questions for Kevin at this time? We'll move along to Peter. Finance and Library.
Thank you, Mr. President. All I'm really going to talk about tonight, and please, Lisa, as my fellow member of the Finance Committee, please chime in whenever you feel appropriate. I want to talk about the status and the decisions that council is going to need to make going forward with the 2022 budget. The one in your packet in front of you is the result of a lot of hard work by staff and a lot of input from community organizations that the borough funds, as well as a lot of discussions amongst the committee members. But was put together in an extraordinary year with extraordinary pressures on our budget. And I would direct you to two important numbers, which if you're looking at the paper, would be on toward the bottom of page 11. I'm sorry, not page 11, the bottom of page 9. There's the third to last says general fund revenue total. How much money we're taking in revenue, $9.7 million. The next line is the general fund expenditure total, how much the budget in its current state plans to spend. So presented to you tonight is a budget deficit of $333,000. You see the number below. Okay, so that's the most important thing for you to recognize about the budget in front of you. Now let me go through the reasons why it exists the way it does. And I'll start on page 1. The Finance Committee is very, very used to looking at this document, so if I get ahead of you, please stop me. I promise not to use the numbers on the side, which everybody in the meeting uses, and I've finally learned to use. I'm just going to look, what you want to look at most of the time is the very last column, where it says 2022 future year budget, okay? First of all, under the principal revenues, real estate property taxes is in the first grouping. You'll see $1.4 million. Quiz, what's our millage rate today?
1.41.
So, isn't that make the math easy? For all of you to remember, 0.1 mil equals about $100,000 in new tax revenue. Okay? Remember, we have a budget deficit. One of the ways we can raise revenue is through property taxes. So, remember that. Okay? It doesn't change this year because at the present time we haven't changed our real estate millage. The next group of taxes are very important to us. You can see we raised over $5 million from them, but they've stayed relatively flat except for the earned income tax, which, bless our lucky stars, has continued to rise over the past decade, our receipts. So Borough staff feels comfortable raising it from 3.9 to 4 million. 4 million is our expectation of receipts for this year. So we already think we're going to be ahead for this year, so it's a safe estimate to keep it there. Most of the other numbers stay pretty much the same. The next number I will ask you to consider is on page 2. And even though the spelling is wrong and it looks like a Spanish hors d'oeuvre or deal, it means federal shared revenue. The American Rescue Plan Act. Congress in its wisdom saw fit to give Media Borough just shy of $600,000 over a 2-year period. We've received that first tranche, $297,000 last year. Thought we might have to spend it in this year's budget, but we have not. So we can carry it forward into next year. We plan to use it in the operating budget. Note that, $300,000 in one-time money we're using toward a budget that still shows a $300,000 deficit. The last thing I wanted to show you in the revenue side is the very last number on, it's on page 3 toward the bottom, and it's under a grouping called Intra-Fund Transfers. And the number is transfer from capital reserve. Peter, why are you showing us a number that reads as 0? That's important because last year, in order to balance what we thought was going to be a very difficult budget, you'll see in the first column, we planned to take $600,000 of savings and put it into our budget. If you look at the actual thing we've done this year, you see it's at 0, we haven't had to do it. We don't think we'll have to do it next year. We're not balancing the budget on our savings account, and thus we have the deficit shown. Okay, so all that total revenue is 9.7 million, which is the next number. Now, even though there probably ought to be a big line right there, there isn't, because we go from revenue right into expenses, therefore. The staffing expenses, the regular expenses of the borough, if anything, mostly have gone down. Because we've recognized a lot of savings last year that have continued into the next budget. But that's not really the source of where the increases are coming from. One of the only significant changes is in IT services. We're just recognizing that IT costs a lot of money, and we want to budget for it appropriately. We have a lot of different things that use computers, you all know that, and if they don't operate properly, you know the trouble they cause. So we've tried to put a real number in there for how much that costs. So it goes from $82,000 in this current budget to $148,000 in next year's budget. The real change, the most significant change in the budget really, I think, is in fire protection, which starts at the bottom of page 5. This is what Paul was talking about in his report, how President Hall and Councilman Robinson and I have been speaking to the fire company about what they really need to do, most particularly to hire, as is their intention, 3 full-time staff for the day. So the biggest change in our contribution to them is in the second to last line on that page. Contribution for paid staff goes from $30,000 this year to $497,000 next year. Now that throws a lot of other things in besides salary, including equipment, workers' comp, benefits, etc., to come up with that number. But if you look at the next page at the top, it summarizes everything in the intended budget or contribution to the fire company, and it goes from $315,000 this year to $695,000 next year. That's a $380,000 increase. It is the most significant change in the operating budget. Because they need full-time staffers, you know, as we've discussed, as they've been telling us for years. This is a change that's occurring like a glacier moving into firefighting everywhere in the country.
You can't get the volunteers?
Because we can't get the volunteers, that's right. Recycling has gone up a little bit, that's happening nationwide. It's not as cheap as it used to be. That's an extra $50,000 for us. That's on the top of page 7. And another significant increase is in our kiosks. We've had to add a $200,000 line item for contracted services to maintain them. Okay.
Is that
What else do I have
200 a
to-
year?
What?
Is that 200 a year?
No, that's a one-time cost, I believe, Brittany. I don't think it's going to be that much every year.
I'll have to get back.
Yeah, we will get back to you, Paul. It's not my understanding that it's every year. I think some certain obligations in the contract come up this year, and that's why it's coming this year. You all are always very interested, usually, in what we're giving to organizations outside the borough. You'll see that there's a modest increase in the overall contributions to, I call them non-government or NGOs, driven by 2 changes, most significant changes. One is the Media Arts Council asked us for an actual doubling of their contribution, our contributions to them, so that they could establish themselves on State Street. The Finance Committee is not recommending that big an increase, but they are recognizing recommending a small increase to $40,000. The other big change is for the Fellowship House, which needs to redo its floor. I'm sorry, the Youth Center, which needs to redo its floor, and we'd like to contribute to that, so that doubles their contribution from $5,000 to $10,000. That makes up the most of the difference. Another significant addition is to the MBA. The MBA has asked us, and we all heard it, a one-time increase. So we'll see what they say to us next year. But a one-time increase so they can hire an administrative assistant so Dave Fairman doesn't have to input his own data and empty his own trash cans and move New Jersey barricades himself, et cetera, et cetera. It's not quite as much as he has to today. The committee felt, and includes the liaison to the MBA, Ms. Johnson, that they've done a lot of significant work to improve the organization, and the Finance Committee recommends that we support that increase. And we'll look at them with cockeyed if they come back and ask for it to be permanent next year. In miscellaneous expenses, for a couple of years, we've carried an economic development line that's been significant. though we haven't spent a lot of it, so staff has recommended we drop it from 130 to a more realistic $50,000, so that is there. Okay, so the $333,000, the Finance Committee and staff don't see any easy way to get rid of that without real pain and real discomfort for the community. So we believe, we're recommending that the Borough Council consider an increase in our millage to close that gap. Millage in real estate property tax. And that the committee further recommends that additional millage be imposed as a special fire tax, which is within our right to do. It's a very simple thing. It would simply mean that we would have 2 resolutions on millage this year, one for the general millage that we do every year, and one for the fire tax, which would represent the difference. The reason that the committee recommended doing it, setting it at that deficit, at the deficit number, is it's roughly equivalent to the increased cost for the fire department this year, and the committee does not feel that it's completely confident in the actual year-to-year expenses of the fire company, such that we might find ourselves in future years having to raise that millage, but we don't want to do it now. We'd rather do it as we have more data and really know what we're doing. So, let me pause there, and because I've just talked a lot about the operating budget and I haven't talked about the capital budget at all. So let me pause here and ask if there are any questions about the operating budget.
Question 1, you referenced the ARPA funds. You said you're putting them into our operating budget?
Half of them.
Well, we're only getting half of it this year.
The other half will receive in time to put into next year's capital budget, which I haven't spoken about yet, but it's in the capital budget.
What do you mean by, I mean, literally there's requirements of where the ARPA funds can be spent. I know that you're aware of that.
Yeah, we're well aware of the
Right.
ball, and that's taken into consideration and won't be a problem.
I highly suggest that we do not do that. I don't think that's recommended by anybody that you put ARPA funds directly into an operating fund.
Ms. Foreman? I'll allow you to answer this one.
There are 4 uses.
No, there's uses, but I'm just saying it's not recommended.
Yeah, one of the uses is for the general revenue backfill, and recognizing that.
We have 5% decrease in revenues. We just said
No,
we
actually,
didn't
so-
lose revenues.
So there's a,
I don't want to debate it. I mean,
okay.
Okay,
Well,
that wasn't really a question, that was a philosophical point. Do you have any other questions, Paul?
well, the other thing is I'm wondering why we just don't add on to our existing real estate millage without pointing out that it's now a dedicated fire tax. We're allowed to do it. If we're going to do that, then maybe we should just, both of our big pies that we are into is maybe we should then also create the library tax at the same time and kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Can't do it so easily, Paul. The library tax requires a voter referendum. It's not the same thing. You can't do it just by executive fiat.
But whatever you say, Peter.
It's not, I don't make it up, it's a Pennsylvania state law.
Okay.
Any other questions on the operating fund? Hearing uneasy silence, I'll move on to the capital fund. Well, actually, before that, the next thing is the recreation fund, which really hasn't changed much this year. We really hope the Recreation Commission will get to spend their money this year,
It would be nice.
because they struggled to spend their money last year because of COVID. Sorry, I had my mic off. So that's really page 10, is the recreation budget. We give them the money, they spend it, so it's a zero budget, As much as we give them, they expect to spend. And if they don't spend it, we don't give it to them. The next page, page 11, is the beginning of the capital budget. To remind everybody, this is where we put things that are big and expensive and last a long time. As in all the budgets, it starts with revenue sources. The second source is the American Rescue Plan Act, as I mentioned. The second $297,000 is used particularly we hope to use it to fill some of the gaps in our very expensive stormwater projects, which are in process and have some gaps. The next thing, there's a variety of grant funding you see there. Most of them are reimbursable, so you have to actually do the project before you can get the money back. So we have to put the cash out first. But nevertheless, we do get the money eventually if we do the project. So that's very good money to have. That's $2.5 million if we happen to get all those projects done. The next thing I want to point out to you is intra-fund transfers from the capital reserve. Okay? If you look at 2 lines down from that $1.4 million, you see that the total revenue, the total capital budget is $4.3 million. The 1.47 simply is the gap between the revenue we have and what all the projects would cost if we got them all done. So to make the capital fund zero out, we simply show a transfer from our savings account into this budget to make it balance. What happens year into the capital budget that we are unable to complete. So even though we often show, like this year, a $6 million capital budget, oftentimes the results are much less. Know that this is the kind of budget where we only proceed when we know we have the money to do so. And while the committee put the 1.4 million in to simply make it work, it would never be the Finance Committee's recommendation to use that much savings in 1 year to complete all these projects. So we will have to do value engineering as the year goes on and actually see how much of these projects we can actually complete. I will mention, though, that one of the more important things we want to do this year is in Borough Hall. That's at the top of page 12. $250,000 are projected to be used largely on deferred maintenance and largely in the police headquarters. A lot of painting, a lot of fixing up, a lot of other things in the Borough Hall complex, which the Properties Committee has put together a comprehensive plan to redo. So this is kind of the first big installment on that. One other thing I would want to mention I think I skipped it. Yeah, I did skip it. Toward the bottom of page 11, under the administration section of the capital budget, there's 2 implementation lines at the bottom of plans that we have completed and we're working to implement. They're not specific as to what that we would do. They simply provide us the option to move forward on some of these projects in the open space plan and traffic calming plan should they arise. I think the traffic calming plan numbers are based on 2 discrete projects from the plan and 2 new murals, which have proved to be, intersection murals, which have proved to be a popular thing. And the open space plan implementation is just based on what seems to be a reasonable amount to set aside from our savings should we be able to do some of the implementation recommendations in the open space plan this year. Okay, so there's a lot in here. The committee and the staff worked very hard to get it where it is today. It's been 15 or so years. I think Mr. Hall knows exactly when the last time we raised our real estate millage.
2006.
So 15 years. None of us like to do this, but we find ourselves in a bind, most particularly because of the changes to fire companies happening throughout the country and now hitting our own fire company here in Media. I don't see any of the expenses, nor I don't think any of my committee members see any of the expenses in this budget as being extravagant, unneeded, or unnecessary. It simply is what it is. So at this point, open it up for any comments you may have.
Any comment? Well, first of all, thank you very much, Peter, Lisa, Brian Towson-Glux, who's also on the Finance Committee, Brittany Foreman, helps keep them in line, and everybody else, the administrative staff, all those department heads, representatives of nonprofits in the community for participating in this. It is a long process. It starts somewhere in the middle of summertime is when we start going through the expenses, seeing what we can do to shave those down as best we can, and then we move on to the revenues and try and project as best we can what amounts will be coming in the upcoming year. It is a long task because it is a complicated task. And thank you very much for everybody involved for keeping the focus on and doing this concentrated work. But Peter has a question. Do we have any questions? I guess I have a general question. Is there any recommendations from the Finance Committee as to how it is that we can bridge the gap between the projected shortfall and where we need to be?
Yeah, I thought I said it, but I guess it wasn't clear enough. What we are recommending is that the borough institute a new tax, a new property tax. Yeah, I don't love it any more than you do, Sarah, but to close the gap, it would be approximately 0.33 mils, because that's our gap.
I thought that was what you're angling towards. I just wanted to understand if that was the recommendation.
It is, yeah, it is.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
Not tonight.
So, Peter, I'm curious if you could provide some context as to what a draft budget is versus the adopted budget and the timing of all that.
Yeah, I can. Normally by this time we've got a balanced budget, so it's a little different this year. But assuming, I mean, it would be helpful to get a sense of council this evening about whether or not borough staff can present a draft budget 2 weeks from now that closes the gap by instituting a new tax. That would be helpful, because otherwise we're going to present to you in 2 weeks and ask you to adopt this, which is out of balance.
We talk process for a minute.
I'd like that, Bob, because there is.
So there's an obligation to advertise the availability of a preliminary budget. And it doesn't need to be balanced, it can show that deficit, but it should be as close to what you actually intend to propose as possible. And it needs to be available, I think, for a period of 10 days. So what I see is in 2 weeks you would vote to advertise a preliminary budget. And then in the month of December, you will need to possibly enact an ordinance if there's going to be a fire tax. I'm not sure. You know, they changed the law. It used to be every year you adopted a tax ordinance. And then the statute was amended so that you could do it by resolution, but I'm not sure if when you're adding a new millage line, if that means you have to go back to the ordinance. If that's the case,
I'm sorry, that means what?
you have to do it by ordinance, not resolution. If it has to be done by ordinance, and I'll figure this out before next week, that means at the first meeting in December, you would direct what that ordinance is going to say. I'd advertise it, you'd adopt it at the next one. At the third Thursday meeting in December.
Okay, so I think what Bob just said still allows me to, ask you what I was asking you. What's your feelings on this? And let me present you an alternative too that I believe Councilman Robinson likes better. And Paul, I don't want to put words in your mouth. In some senses, what we call the increase in the property tax is kind of semantics, right? And because it comes from the same source. It's just
general millage or fire millage is going to be the same thing to the tax.
That's right. The taxpayer is going to pay the same thing.
And I'll just throw a little more process. The Borough Code has categories of millage you can assess, one of which is for general purposes. And then there's fire, there's street lights, which is kind of archaic because that's such a small portion of the budget these days. But this, in media, it's always, because your real estate taxes are lower than a lot of other places, you can stay within that, and there's a cap on millage on each of those categories. And I believe that the cap on general millage is 20, something like that. You're at 4 or what, 1.4?
1.4,
Yeah,
I
so
know on
you've got-
fire it's 30.
Right, I know, so it's, yeah, so, you could do it either way, that is correct.
So we could do it either way. So my point is, my request to you, or for you to consider, is we have to raise these taxes. The thought of the committee was the principal reason we have to change these taxes is because of the reality of the change in the fire department. So we are recommending that we call it that, because that's what we think the principal, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to the budget, but the single biggest, tidal wave that came through was the fire company, so we thought we could call it that. However, as a finance committee, I mean, if you all decided, let's just raise the general millage, we'll still have the same amount of money coming in. You see my point? Okay? So anyway, so in either case, we need that money.
I'll respond to your question, Peter. I think that you've spoken to the predicate for this need very, very well. We need, our fire company needs funding that it's never, that it's needed before, but it's gotten to the point where it's essential. For them to provide their service to our community, they need this help. Fortunately, we live in a community where we have some flexibility to do something about it. And I think that this is a fair way of approaching the problem. I think that we do need to have these resources to help support an adequate fire service in our community.
And we can do that by just increasing our general millage. It also gives us more flexibility with the revenue in which we derive from the millage increase. This is a brand new endeavor. There's not anybody at this table that is fully aware of what the cost will be. We put together good estimates, but I think by putting in our general millage, it gives us more flexibility. And it's something that, instead of just targeting one organization for the reason for the rise in our taxes, isn't necessarily an accurate statement. I mean, we're filling our gap with ARPA funds, we're filling our gap with capital funds that we haven't required to use yet. But I just think that the easier way, the more flexible way, is to put these funds just into our general millage. We can state everything we stated tonight. Mr. Williamson can say that the only reason we're raising taxes is because of fire, but we don't necessarily have to create a fire tax. We don't know what's going to go on in a couple of years, so I mean, I just would encourage us that we haven't had a millage increase, which isn't necessarily a financially smart thing to do for 15 years. So if we're going to do a millage increase, just have it to our general millage, not to a dedicated tax.
I think the fire would be just, no, not just the general,
So I think you
because
need to
the
put your
county
mic.
did that last
Mic comes
year.
up there, Terry's mic.
Could you just say it again, sir? You didn't have your mic on. Could you say it again, so the public can hear?
Everybody can hear my voice, it carries like you wouldn't believe. I think instead of the general, that it should be under fire. There you go.
Anybody else wish to, I think that Peter is asking for a non-binding sense of council so that the finance committee can continue doing its work without having to worry that it's going to take a big eraser to everything in a couple of weeks' time. So I think I've heard Sarah, Paul, Amy is also in agreement, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm part of the finance committee.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm not crazy about it, but I don't see another alternative, so we love it, we have this.
Right. We all have to pay it too.
Yeah, it's true.
There was a piece of information I hoped to have tonight, but I don't have it. And that was, like, what is the average property assessment? Do we have, Brittany, what is it?
It's at 951 million, essentially.
Yeah, but what's divided by how many, what's an average?
Oh, an average.
Yeah, so
Oh.
what's an average property owner gonna pay in increased media borough taxes? That's what I was wondering. If it's about 3.3 mils, I think it's gonna be about $70 to $90 more in your real estate tax bill from media, I think. Because I think the average is around $350,000 for an assessed value.
We could definitely do that, and I don't know if you saw my kind of back of the envelope estimate, but I think it's gonna be more like 0.4.
0.4, okay.
With like
So it could be, you can see the.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a reminder, everybody, media's portion of your real estate property tax is the smallest portion. It might be 10 or 15% at most of your real estate property tax. The rest is the county and the school district.
Okay.
Anything else, Peter?
Just to tack on to that, I'm sorry. The 0.4 that you mentioned, that we may have to do.
Do you have your mic on?
Yes.
I do. If we have to raise taxes by 0.4 mils, to cover about $400,000 in the deficit, that's the portion that would come to the borough, right?
It comes to the borough.
Right, that's the portion that comes to the borough now. When we pay our real estate taxes.
As Peter was saying, you pay a larger portion to the school district and the county.
Right.
But the borough gets all of the 1.4 mils of your individual property tax.
So we're changing it in
The
this
scenario.
scenario, 1.4 to 1.8.
8, for instance, yeah.
And we can increase our portion without increasing the
Correct.
other portion.
Without increasing other entities, yes.
Just wanted to get that out there in the ether.
I'm confused on that one.
She was asking, like, if we do 0.4, is the school district's taxes going, is the school
Is that
district
what you're
millage
saying?
going up?
School
Or
district-
is the
oh.
county's millage going up? It's just ours.
Well, not necessarily, the school and the county could raise it.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have anything to do with the county or the
No,
school
I
district.
know, but a dollar, right now, when we pay our real estate taxes, we pay $1, only 15 cents of that dollar comes to the borough.
There are 3 separate taxes, it's kind of like you pay 3 separate bills. So you're paying all your bill to us for whatever we're sending the bill out for.
Okay.
My point is, all I'm trying to say is that we're increasing the borough's portion of the real estate bill. Not the county portion, not the school.
Correct.
All right, thank you, Lisa, for that clarification. Any other comments, questions before we move along to Sarah? All right, Sarah. You're up.
Giggle pause.
Okay, so there's just one thing that we're going to cover today. And that's because the administration has recommended a salary increase for the person who, well, Robert Anderson. He's been doing all kinds of wonderful things with meters. And let me put on glasses. Okay, so Mr. Roberts' position is called meter maintenance, and he does coin collection and coordination with the vendor, maintaining and fixing meters and kiosks, all kinds of things like that. And so it is saying bringing him up to where the other people are would be like $24 an hour as opposed to $20 at all. And that is what is being recommended by the Personnel Committee. as accepting the administration's suggestion and recommending that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I do have a question for you there. It says, bring it in line to others performing similar duties. Who are these others?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Who are the others that are doing similar duties? Are
Highway
they
laborers,
our highway labor?
or highway laborers.
They're doing meter technician similar duties?
No, they're getting paid more than our meter technician currently is. So we're looking to increase the rate of pay for the meter technician, so it's more in line with what our highway laborers get paid on an hourly basis.
Okay, but it's not necessarily similar duties.
That's
When I
correct.
read that, I
But
was like, who else is doing meter technician work?
if there's two parts.
So
to
there's
this.
two, yeah, I was gonna say two parts. One, and as Councilman Robinson just mentioned, is that some of his duties are labor-like, and he's getting paid less than laborers, even though he's a very technical repair job. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is that we also took a look at other communities that have significant parking meter operations, and he is much lower in that case as well, as other parking meter collectors and technicians.
Yep, thanks.
All right, any other questions or comments concerning Sarah Ledham? Sarah, anything else?
Oh, no, thank you, Mr. President.
Alrighty then, so Karen, we have the opportunity to accept public comment by way of email. Have we had any emails since we began this evening?
Yes, I have one.
Okay, thank you. And does the person indicate where they live?
He does.
Good.
Michael Straw, 499 West Jefferson. Congratulations to all the winners of the recent Media Borough Council race and Mayor McMahon in their elections and re-election last Tuesday, November 2nd. I wish you all well and luck on your new terms on Borough Council and as mayor.
All right. Okay, well, thank you. Now we have the opportunity for in-person public comment and privilege of the floor. If anybody wishes to address council, please come to the microphone and tell us your name, where you live, and what's on your mind.
I'm Julie Smith, 810 North Olive Street.
Dave, is the microphone on? Okay.
I came here just to listen to the budget, and I didn't know that our stormwater plan was going to be on the agenda this evening, so I'm really glad I was here. I have begged Kevin and Brittany to please keep in touch with me to let me know what's going on. My next door neighbor still has an open sinkhole in his front yard that's been there since April. My driveway still has yet to be repaired. When I heard that Paul was really pushing for a project, I even emailed him and thanked him, and he said, "I'd be screaming if I were you." And you know what, I was like, he's been so nice. I've been living there for 14 years begging for help. My grandmother before that, we have sandbags along our back. We're waiting to do home repairs until the water stops washing by our house. I never know when another hole's gonna go open up. And then Kevin fires us out that the whole plan's gonna be canceled.
No, not that part.
No, it's all part of the same thing, though. He's going to fix the sinkhole. That's I guess, what's going to happen next, but the communication has been horrific. So I'm begging all of you, I would invite you all to come to my house. I'll show you what's going on with the stormwater. I'll show you what's happening with the sinkholes. You want to talk about safety in town? My next door neighbor was lawn mowing and went into a hole. This is insane, and it's been since, his hole is still open, and it's been there since April, and this is okay, oh, let's just take a pause. This is nuts. I want to sell my house and get the heck out of here. How can I think that anybody's representing us when this is how I have to go home every night to my busted up driveway? This is insane. I'm begging you all to help us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anybody else who wishes to address council at this time? Seeing that there's none, we have a motion to adjourn to executive session. We have several items, a couple litigation, and a personnel. So, we have a motion to adjourn to executive session. All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none opposed, we'll adjourn to executive session. Good night, folks. See you in a couple of weeks.